the world was a lot more forgiving of the hiccups.
So he thought of toys. You said it was a bad idea.
The figures were gone forever. So it was kind of like a last chance opportunity.
Welcome back to Built in America. I'm your host, Sam Mahmood, and we're sitting down with Austin Long, co-founder of Youtooz, a company that brings the internet culture to life with collectibles. Austin, how's it going, man?
Very good. Thanks for having me, Sam.
Absolutely, man. You know, I think the audience would be very keen to know a little bit more about Youtooz. I think what you've built is something quite unique in a sector that not many people know about. Give us a little bit of background about Youtooz.
For sure, absolutely. So we started Youtooz in 2019. Prior to Youtooz, my background was in talent representation of YouTubers and streamers. So my last company managed and represented a lot of gaming and entertainment talent, mostly on YouTube, but also on Twitch. So in 2019, my co-founder and I, we thought it'd be cool and unique to start making collectibles, mostly because we were big fans of Cause and Bear Brick and kind of the art and designer toy world, but we felt like it hadn't been applied to creators in a way that was a little bit more niche and fan service versus mass market. So initially we were like, hey, we'll make a few figures and we'll see if people like it. So we initially launched in early 2019 and it kind of took off from there.
You know, in Youtooz, you guys still have like a product market fit here, a very unique sector. Would you see the void in this sector to go and start something like this?
Yeah, the void was really that no one was making specialized collectibles, specifically like likeness-based products for creators. There always has been, and probably always will be, like merch offerings for creators, so T-shirts, hoodies, things that are not really too bespoke. But there was a huge gap in more bespoke products that were really designed in collaboration with the creators, very specific to their likeness, kind of captured what fans loved about them. And the only offerings from more traditional companies were very mass market service. So it was, hey, let's make, a cheap toy and put it in Walmart and Target. Whereas we took more of a fan service approach, which is, let's put more money into this. Let's make it a beautiful product. Let's distribute it direct to consumers so you don't have to depend on, a retailer being interested or knowing who the creator is. And that was sort of the gap we saw. And for the first year, we only worked with streamers and creators before we sort of got introduced to the world of licensed IP.
All right, so tell me a little bit about that. So, finding a niche of streamers and creators, it's a very unique space. And what I really like about that too is there's a strong loyalty as well. The gamers in that space, they spend a ton of money. So who were some of the first streamers and gamers you went to, and then how did things start to expand from there?
Yeah, so because of my background, thankfully I knew a lot of the top gamers and content creators. So we were really able to hit the market fast and kind of offer fans a lot to start with. So in 2019, we worked with the Misfits, which was our first release, Fit, Swagger, Souls, and Toby. And then throughout the rest of 2019, we worked with Pokimane, Mr. Beast, the Sidemen, Markiplier. So we really hit the ground running in 2019. And then moving into 2020, we ended up working with Jacksepticeye, Dude Perfect. So a lot of household names. And I think that really helped us establish both the brand and also the identity of what we were building, just because so many fans knew about the products we were launching.
So you obviously had a background of being connected to people like Mr. Beast and some very large YouTubers and streamers in the space, but then you've also built a very incredible brand as well, direct to consumer model, manufacturing product, getting mass distribution, which is not easy, right? So walk us through when you first started building the company. You have so many SKUs, you guys customize SKUs today. That's not an easy manufacturing process. As I built a medical device company overseas, had a plant over there, brought it here to the US. It's a damn beast, right? So you obviously know one side of the business of creating a virality effect of being able to connect with people who have a large following, but then there's the other side of direct consumer. So how did you learn that aspect of the business, and then walk us through that whole manufacturing process and getting those SKUs ready for everyone? There's some disasters along the way, I'm sure. Give us some context around that.
Yeah, we had to get our hands dirty because my background, being in talent, I didn't really have any product background. And my co-founder, similarly, he was more in kind of tech and software. So he equally didn't have much background in manufacturing. So we really had to learn it the hard way, which was just getting our hands dirty. And, about a year, I guess a year and a half in the business is when COVID hit. And that definitely made it, even more difficult. I would say it was both kind of a blessing and a curse for us, a blessing in the sense that, I would say the world was a lot more forgiving of the hiccups, experienced in manufacturing. And I would say it was super difficult just because it made everything, it was like starting a business on try hard mode. It was just everything was going wrong. So I would say what we really found was building great relationships with suppliers and manufacturers is key. Having them understand our business model, what works well for us, maybe what the risks are, working with us, that sort of thing. And then also being very transparent with customers in terms of like, here's when, the product will ship, here's the process of making the product so that you can understand, 2D design, 3D modeling. So we actually have a page on our site that details the whole manufacturing process along with how long it takes, just to kind of loop people in. But yeah, there were definitely a lot of hiccups initially when we launched, just around figuring out colors, like especially Pantone colors. When you move from designing, a collectible digitally to moving it physically, sometimes the colors don't match. You also have things like balance issues where, if a figure is front heavy or back heavy, it might not stand up. So I would say for the first year, if you look back at a lot of the figures we released, I would say all of them sort of had like small, hiccups and small issues. And we really took in that feedback from fans, which I think was really only possible because we were direct to consumer first. We didn't have to wait a year or two for Walmart to come back to us and say, hey, there were these 5 issues with the product. We were really getting that feedback in real time. And I think we treated collectibles and the manufacturing process of it much more akin to a tech product than a physical product, in the sense that we were constantly iterating, constantly improving it. And if you look at that first year releases, from figure to figure, you'll see kind of those changes in real time. Like for example, when we first started shipping products, we only had a blister on the back of the figure, and we found that they were falling forward and falling out. So then we added a front blister. So it was small stuff like that over time, that allowed us to figure out the manufacturing process.
Do you have any unique IP on this? So I think a lot of people would be very interested in a space like this now. You guys have obviously paved the way of creating collectibles in a streaming space, right? And being a direct to consumer
Mhm.
model. So how do you guys separate yourself from other people who want to go start something like this today?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there's a few things. It's definitely the expertise and experience. Like, you need to know how to make the stuff, and you need the connections to the people that are relevant. You need great distribution. So whether that's DTC or retail, those are definitely blockers. It is hard to get into retail stores. You can't just kind of pitch and see the product on the shelves. And then you have to have that audience. So I think we really found a way to kind of blend all three together, get in front of people, put a great product in front of them, and then distribute in a way that's, easy for collectors to be interested in. And I would say that sort of separated us from others. And then there's definitely just the grit of it of, getting your hands dirty, being willing to put in long hours, being willing to kind of work through all the challenges that come up.
There's a phrase I like to always say is like, in high school we didn't probably pay attention too much to math and arithmetic, but there's something that what I'm hearing about your story that really resonates with me is back in high school, like we learned about the standard deviation, which is the distance between you and the core, right? Or the core and where you're going next, right? And what I hear what you're saying here is that you had a large reach of very influential people. You figured out how to build a really good team around you. And then you knew how to create some level of IP to get into Walmarts and big stores around you, which created a competitive advantage. So if you're going to start this all over again, you use like what your organic opportunity is rather than trying to go do something and raise a bunch of venture capital in a sector that you don't really know much about, right? So
Mhm.
if you were to start all over today, what are a couple things that maybe you do differently that you can explain to the audience versus what you guys had done in the past?
Yeah, so I'd say a couple things we do differently. We probably would have hired more expertise a little bit earlier. We definitely kind of waited as long as we could, which I think was helpful. It's good to learn manufacturing yourself, but we did end up hiring a VP of manufacturing from Apple. We hired a creative director from EA Games. So over time, we brought in more experts, and I think maybe if we started over again, we might have done that a little earlier, just to navigate some of those challenges that we faced ourselves versus maybe having experts in the room. And then I would say the second one is probably, we built a software over time to help us manufacture. Originally, it was very, I would say, kind of all over the place. We are using Google Sheets and Excel, and it definitely wasn't kind of managed all in one place. And over time, we built the software to manage our manufacturing process. And I think had we done that earlier, a lot of the hiccups we ran into interfacing with suppliers, working on the designs, would have been navigated faster. So I think had we done it again, we probably would have delved more into the software side of the business earlier.
In every partnership, there's usually like a visionary and integrator. You hear that a lot, right? Tell me about your relationship with your partner and how you guys are able to build this so fast.
Yeah, so I would say we have a really, really good relationship in the sense that it's kind of left brain, right brain. I look after a lot of the more front-facing things of business development, partnerships, meeting with creators or IP holders, discussing how we can bring products to life. And then he really manages the beef of the business, the internal infrastructure, the hiring, integrating teams, the software, the logistics. So we have a really good way of working together because we're not oftentimes stepping on each other's toes, which I think sometimes happens, when you have two founders that are maybe both trying to run in the same lane. We really sort of each have our own lane, but they're in parallel, so we're working together very often, but, not getting in each other's way.
Yeah, I think that's it's super important to have someone who's the yin to the yang of the business, right?
Mhm.
How did you guys meet and so forth? And like, did you guys have any prior business experience prior to starting Youtooz? Like, where did the relationship really start?
Yeah, so my last company was Omnia Media, and then before that it was Square One. So I started in high school, kind of managing content creators. Originally, I just like to make videos myself, but I found over time that I was much better behind the camera than in front of it. So in high school, I started managing creators. That business ended up getting rolled up into Omnia, and I sort of took a big leadership role there as long as becoming a co-founder. And that business operated from like 2013, 2014, all the way until when we sold it, 2016. And then I stuck around for a few years after. And during that time, my co-founder Mark was launching like video games and online projects, and I had met him basically just in the process of him looking for content creators to work with, and me being someone that was really well connected in the gaming space. And then over time, we sort of just kept in touch. And as I was peeking my head up to look for a new opportunity after we sold Omnia, he was like, "Hey, let's make some toys." And originally, I was like, "That is a terrible idea. I don't think it's going to work." But we gave it a shot, and now we're here.
So he thought of toys. You said it was a bad idea. Where was an inflection point that you saw? You know what? This might have legs.
Yeah, so I think, and I'll give a bit of background. The reason I thought it was a bad idea was because at Omnia, we had helped a bunch of creators get into Walmart and Target with more, I guess, like kid leaning toy products. Like Tube Heroes was the main one that we helped out with, where we helped licensing kind of the creators that they wanted and then bringing it to market. And the challenge that we found is by the time those products landed on the shelves, it was a year and a half after the creators had said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And that much of a gap, creators can become uninterested. Maybe they're not as relevant. Maybe they change their hair and they don't even look the same. Like, you never know. So I had a really, I guess, bad experience in it, and I was like, people weren't that into it. Fans didn't like it. It wasn't a great program. So when he brought it up, that was kind of in my head. But he was like, "No, let's take a direct to consumer first approach. Let's figure out how we can manufacture faster." So our average lead time is 6 months for vinyl figure, whereas traditionally, toy companies are working a year and a half out, if not longer. So it was really, let's make a product faster, let's distribute it directly to fans versus having a middleman, and then let's really empower the creators to design stuff that they think is going to cater to their audience, which is where a lot of our design inspiration comes from. Making something that kind of pulls an emotion out of you. It's a favorite moment, it's a subscriber milestone, it's an event they put on, something that kind of goes beyond just making a person standing there with a prop in their hand.
And tell me about some of the toys that you guys have made that's taken some, crazy virality. What are the toys that have been like beyond impactful to some people? What has
Mhm.
done really well? What hasn't worked? Walk us through some of the toys that have been successful thus far.
Yeah, I would say a few memorable ones like Unisonis was a huge one for us when it launched. So Markiplier had teamed up with another creator named Ethan, and they basically ran this YouTube channel for a year where they were uploading videos once a day under the premise that at the end of the year they were just going to delete the entire channel. And kind of the inspiration of it was like you only live once, kind of enjoy it, that sort of thing. So we made a collectible with them in the last, I think it was 14 days of the channel existing. And then when they deleted the channel, we ended the sale. The figures were gone forever. So it was kind of like a last chance opportunity, but it was also a really special way for fans to remember that moment outside of having, a t-shirt or a poster, to have something on their shelf to kind of always remember, you only live once, appreciate every day, and remember all the content that they had watched during that year because now it's all gone. So I would say that was a really important one for us because it kind of established, part of our identity and being able to capture these iconic and relevant fan moments. So that was one. Another one would have been Lo-Fi Girl. It was a channel that so many people resonate with. It's a channel where they basically play lo-fi music all day, and it's relaxing. You can work to it, you can study to it. Some people fall asleep to it, and we were able to capture the aesthetic and emotion of that by creating a figure of the girl studying at her desk. And I think that one was really dynamic, had a nice pose, but it also felt like it was directly pulled from the content. So if you had it on your desk and you had the stream up, you felt like you were even more connected, to kind of that experience of listening or watching. So I would say those two really stuck out to me. And then just a lot of the like video game and other IP we've worked on, pulling those key characters out and then creating, a pose and a moment in a way that when you hold it as a fan, it kind of brings a smile to your face. That's really what we look at when we're designing things.
I think one thing that the audience would want to know, Elson, is you've built a successful large business now. It's healthy 8 figures in revenue, but that obviously probably took a lot of cash to start the business, right? I don't, did you raise any venture capital? Did you bootstrap the entire company? I want to know a little bit about that process as people are curious about how to go build a big direct to consumer business, especially in e-commerce today. One thing about e-commerce I always comment on is, the path to entry is actually pretty easy, but to be able to scale effectively is actually quite difficult. So
Mhm.
from that early stage, where did the capital really come from? How did you guys get started?
Yeah, so we were lucky to have really supportive seed investors that kind of came early on and were supportive mostly just of, Mark and myself, less so even the vision of the business, more just like, hey, these are great guys, we're going to get behind them. And then we did self-fund it as well. With my exit at Omni, I did have, capital that I was able to deploy into the business. Really the upfront costs were mostly the design, the tooling, the development of kind of our first few figures. And because we work on a pre-order model, we're able to really kind of self-contain the cash flow of the business where we don't need to go out and raise a monster round with a VC that's going to kind of push us to grow artificially. Instead, with our model, we're able to kind of self-fund. So since then, we haven't had to go out and kind of raise more money. We've been able to build the business on our own terms in a way where, we're not beholden to someone that might say, hey, go to this, go to that, grow 2 times faster. We have had times since 2019 where there might be a 6 month period where we say, look, we need to pause things. There's some really important infrastructure internally that we need to fix. We're going to slow down our release schedule. We're not going to release as many new products. So I think having the keys to your own fate is really important, but obviously having access to capital to launch a business where you do need it, is important too.
Austin, are you able to tell us kind of the journey when you start from 2019 today, like some of the growth figures, revenue figures, whatever you're comfortable sharing on where you guys started to where you are today?
Yeah, we haven't discussed this year yet. Like we would post that publicly, but in terms of our first few years, we did I think 6 or 7 million in our first year, which is about half a year from when we launched. I think we did about 17 in our second year, and then our third year we did 32. So we really scaled up pretty significantly. We're larger than that now, obviously, and I think our goal is to get to 100, in the next year or two here. And we're doing it in a way that's profitable and cash flow positive. So we're really focused on the fundamentals of building a business that's healthy, that can support, the consumers and collectors that follow us. It doesn't require us to be beholden to, the up and down markets. Because obviously a few years ago, it was really hard to raise money. Now it's a little easier than it was. A few years before that, it was super easy. So we're trying to build it in a way where, we're not beholden to kind of those market up and down ticks.
So you said something really unique there is that you're building a profitable company. You're hitting healthy 8 figures. You're on your way to $100 million probably by year five. I see a lot of seed investment opportunities that come across my table doing $95 million in revenue, still negative EBITDA today. They're spending a lot on
Mhm.
OpEx, CapEx, inventory. They're sitting on $10 million inventory sometimes. You guys have a lot
Mhm.
of SKUs, I assume. How do you go build a profitable company today in a direct to consumer model when ad spend can be very expensive? You got high CACs every once in a while as well. There's so many different variables, but you guys have obviously figured out a system that many people can't figure out. So what builds
Mhm.
it? What's a proper way to go build a cash flowing business in this type of space?
Yeah, it's a good question because I would say a lot of the direct to consumer companies really have that challenge where they almost become beholden to like Facebook and TikTok for ads. So I would say what we've done a bit more unique to that is we're not really beholden to traditional ad spend. Most of our sales are organic. So we create a ton of in-house content. If you go on our TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, I think we do somewhere between 75 and 100 million impressions a month just on content we post. Then you have our creator partners also posting content. You have our brand partners like Disney and NBC and Netflix also helping to post content. So what we've really done is built a brand first and built a content pipeline first that allows us to get in front of people so that we're not beholden to kind of those acquisition costs that are more traditional. And we kind of had to do that. Having a product that's at a 30-ish dollar price point on average is pretty difficult to run on ads because you don't necessarily have as much money to play with. It's much easier to run ads on a $500 product where you have a bit more margin. So that has always been our focus is like how can we build a moat that's a bit more defensible, which really comes down to brand, content, and awareness. And if we can control those things without paying for it, or paying for it in the form of making content versus paying to promote the content, that's what we think is kind of our edge. And I would definitely suggest anyone getting into the DTC space kind of think about that as a primary point versus, how much can I run on ads?
It's a very smart point. So I think today the biggest difference between running ads in 2024 versus running ads in 2017 is that Facebook was Meta and so forth was just way different back then to what it is today.
Hmm.
And people were able to put anything on probably Meta back then and just have a decent CAC and have a good return. But your approach is quite unique in the sense that you focus on organic, high quality content first, building trust with people from the creator network to the streamers to the audience, and making sure people like the Mr. Beast of the world are the ones actually fueling your product, which is actually brilliant. That's very unique. I want to ask a unique question as well, in the sense that you obviously have a global market, correct?
Hmm.
You have a global reach. I'm sure there's some cultural differences when selling in the US to South America to Europe. What have you seen when selling to different parts of the world, and what has resonated the most? Because I know like the Asian market probably really loves this stuff. They're big in the streaming space. They're heavy
Hmm.
gamers over there. Kind of give us that global impact of what Youtooz has been able to produce.
For sure, yeah. We're global at this point. I mean, we distribute to most major regions in the world. There's a few based on like contract rights and stuff. Like, for example, we can't sell anime in Japan, like those sorts of things. But other than that, we do distribute pretty broadly. I would say there's a few things that we saw, from like the cultural side. Certain regions kind of trend into certain genres at different times. Like, for example, I would say anime was super, super big last year in the US. This year it's still big, but it's a little smaller. But in the UK and Europe, it's still what it was for us in the US last year. So there are regions where, genres of content are popular at different times versus kind of the whole world celebrating that content at the same time. So that's one. I'd say the second one is more logistical. Distributing to some countries is a lot more challenging than others. For example, in Brazil, to ship a product there, you need the person's tax ID. Where obviously in the US, you just ship the product to the person. So as we've expanded to more regions, and localized our products, there are those challenges where some countries have more hoops that you have to jump through, and that can kind of slow down the pace of offering products there. And then I would say the third is just the diversity of products. Like we have multiple different product lines. We have our vinyl figures, our plushies, our pins. We have some lighting products too. And there are certain regions where people like figures or they like plushies more than the other. Like, for example, in China, our figures do a lot better than our plushies just because plushies are a little bit less popular there. Whereas when I would say you look at like Latin America, sometimes our plushies are way more popular than our vinyl figures. It sort of just depends on, those local markets and kind of what fans and collectors are looking for. But it definitely is a unique challenge in each country. And we sort of approach them all with, wide open eyes to figure out what's best for that region.
What does the future hold for you guys today? So, is there other licensing opportunities? What other markets you're looking to go expand in? Is it product expansion? There's multiple ways to go grow the business. Kind of give us some insight on like how you guys foresee getting to $100 million in the next couple of years.
For sure. Yeah, the levers that we really look at is bringing in more world-class partners, so whether that's content creators, studios, whether video game or content, and just other licensed IP that we can look at, the music industry, artists, different things that fans might want to collect. So that's the first one. The second one is growing our distribution. So right now we're direct to consumer, we're in retail, we're also launching our own vending machines. We have two right now in LA, one at the AMC Century City and one at the Sherman Oaks Westfield. So we're planning to roll out more vending machines next year as a way to offer our own retail experience outside of what we do with retail partners. And then the third is, looking at new and unique product lines. So we started with just vinyl figures, then we introduced plushies. Each year we tend to try to launch, 1 to 2 new product lines. And if it's sticky, we grow it. And if it's not sticky, at least we tried and then we try something else. So our goal has always been to kind of continuously try to innovate and find things that fans and collectors want, and always be down to try new things. So next year we'll have a few new product lines releasing. And that's kind of like the three levers that we think most about, more partners, better distribution, and new product lines.
There's a lot of listeners who probably are launching new products, have a business, and they have to test and
Hmm.
iterate to see what the market feedback is, right?
Hmm.
At Youtooz, and someone who's been doing this for 4 years now, you guys have done a lot of revenue. What is your testing, iterating process to know it's a good product versus a bad product? And then how do you go and discontinue that product? And then what do you guys do internally from that?
Yeah, so I would say we look at a few things. Mainly, it's definitely sales. Like if a product is great, it's going to sell, and if it isn't, it won't. And you kind of know that right away. There's no faking it. The second one is probably just fan feedback. We have had products that we've launched where the feedback was awesome, but the sales didn't match it, or the feedback wasn't good, but the sales were awesome. So finding that happy blend in the middle is obviously really important. And we just treat it very open internally. No idea is bad. We're always happy to try something new, but we don't go too deep. So you'll see us usually if we're trying a new product line, we might make one or two SKUs. We try them out. If we think it's a good product and maybe there was just something wrong with it, maybe we'll pivot it a bit and try it again. But more often than not, it's either a winner or a loser. And if it's a loser, we take it out behind the barn and we don't think about it again. And if it's a winner, then we double down on it. But I think constantly trying new things is what allows us to stay ahead of peers in our group. And I think it'd be foolish, not to be constantly kind of thinking about what's next, what else can we try.
Yeah, that's a very smart approach. Austin, you built a business in this modern era where content is huge, right? Back in
Hmm.
the early 90s and 80s, like businesses like this really didn't have the opportunity to go thrive, right? Because
Hmm.
I think the TikToks and the Instagrams and the reels of the world weren't really the forefront of how media is really a derivative of where it is today. Tell us a little bit about your background as a kid and like how this cultivated you as a kid, and how you kind of molded into this entrepreneur today. Did you always know you're going to go into media? Were you a content guy? Were you playing video games? Like, walk me through that journey a little bit.
Yeah, I would say I was one of those kids that was like chronically online. And back in, 2012 to 2014, it was kind of the very early days of YouTube. It was right as creators could start to monetize. So that was when you had the inflection point of a lot more content getting uploaded. Obviously pre TikTok, but there was, I think, Vine at the time. Obviously, Twitter was around then, Instagram was around. So I was chronically online and I love video games. So I sort of saw, the intersection of those where people started filming themselves playing games and posting it online. And I just thought, as someone that was, pretty, I would say, reserved, like online, I didn't have a huge friend group. I found those content creators online that I really thought, like, oh, this is funny. I can enjoy watching this. This is something to do with my time. And over time, especially during that kind of 2010, 2011, 2012, I thought, this is definitely going to be the future of content. You're still going to have TV shows and movies, but this genre of content where people are just making it specifically for people that want to watch it, for fans, and there's no intermediary saying this is funny or this isn't. It's just kind of the audience deciding and watching it and sharing it. I thought that was super special, and that was when I started making videos. I started reaching out to other creators saying, hey, can I help you make videos? And sort of just fell into it naturally. But I was definitely mostly fans of like gaming, entertainment, kind of like nerd culture type content.
Who are some of the first gamers that and streamers that really caught your attention that you really knew that this sector was going to boom?
Yeah, back in the day, so I played a lot of Halo, Minecraft, and Call of Duty. So it was like Nade Shot, it was FaZe Clan, Woody's Gamer Tag, like it was creators like that. I definitely watch entertainment creators too. I like a lot of podcasts, so listening to that as well. But back in the day, it was mostly the household names and kind of the gaming community, and then over time, obviously started watching other creators and stuff. But back in the day, it was definitely mostly like Nade Shot, FaZe, the old Logic montages, that FaZe would make, mostly gaming related videos.
So I'm curious. You sold your last company. Obviously had a good exit. What's a dream outcome for Youtooz today?
Yeah, I think what I learned my last time when we sold it, it was a great experience because once we sold the business, I was able to stick around for a few years and really learn from people that had a lot more expertise than me. I mean, I was effectively a kid. When I moved to LA, I was 17. That was back in 2014. So when they bought the business, I was still effectively a kid. I was 20, 21. So for a few years, I was able to learn from them, an environment that was super forgiving. No answers wrong. You can make mistakes. And they sort of let me run with things. But also, if I needed help, if I wanted to learn more, if I wanted an intro to people, it was a really established media brand that was kind of able to offer that. So I felt like I was almost, in like an incubator environment where I could learn and make mistakes. So I would say the dream outcome for Youtooz, is definitely not selling. I mean, I like us being able to do what we want and being able to make great products and not being beholden to anyone. And I really think that we can put a dent, in an industry that is pretty old. When you look at who kind of dominates the toy industry, it's companies that have been around for, 15, 20, 30 years, very well established, incredible brands. but don't really have as strong of an identity with consumers as they used to. Like when you think of a Hasbro, Mattel, a lot of people don't think of those names. They think of, the Batman action figure. They think of, the Marvel superhero action figure, like whatever it might be. Whereas with Youtooz, people definitely think of Youtooz alongside the characters you make. There's much more of a brand identity there. So I think that gives us an incredible opportunity, over the next 5, 10 years to build something that offers fans, a better service, a better product, a better experience, and allows us to kind of take over, an industry that is relatively ancient.
Yeah, I mean, this industry is so niche and unique. I mean, have you guys thought about going into, like the whole Taylor Swift world and the rappers of the world and artists and so forth? Is that a genre that would allow you guys to start scaling even more, or is that kind of out of your own pocket of like what you guys are really good at?
Yeah, I would say our bread and butter is really more, video games, anime, like what we would consider kind of like nerd culture-ish stuff or online culture. We have dabbled into music. I would say we would love to do stuff like Taylor Swift. It is really hard to get the licensing rights. There are some musicians that they just don't allow stuff with likeness. But that is part of our growth too, is exploring. So like, for example, next year we'll have our first like Linkin Park collaboration, which will be like the biggest band we've ever worked with. We just signed our Warner Brothers deal, so we'll have a bunch of DC, related characters, a lot of the classic retro shows. So we are always looking for those new genres, but like everything, we sort of approach them, test them, see what works, because every genre of content's different, and all those fans are different too. What a music fan might be incredibly different to what an anime fan might like. So we usually try a few partnerships, see what works, and then ideate on it.
Austin, if I were hearing this podcast today, I would say Youtooz is on an exponential rise of where it's going. But I think there's always an inflection point in every business where things have their hardships, correct? What was probably the
Mhm.
biggest inflection point where things hit rock bottom at Youtooz, if it did, and how'd you learn from it?
Yeah, I would say our biggest inflection point was definitely during or towards the end of COVID. We had a supplier that at the time probably had, I don't know, maybe 25 or so of our SKUs that we need to get shipped out. People had already ordered them. We need to get working. And this factory essentially just defaulted on us. Like they disappeared overnight. The products never got shipped. They sat in their warehouse. Over time, we came to find out that it was, just a dishonest person in between that wasn't actually running the manufacturing process. They were kind of operating as a proxy to it, and they hadn't been paying their bills, so they were going under. Um, and that was really difficult for us because not only did we have the cash hit of like, hey, these products we've already paid to manufacture are not coming, we need to restart, but we also kind of had, the I guess demoralizing event of then going to customers and saying, hey, we'd love to ship this right now, but we basically have to remake it again. And it's obviously our fault at the end of the day. But here's the rationale for it. Not that anyone cares that much, but it's going to take a while to come. So I would say that was really a tough spot. And through that experience, we learned that, we just need to diversify, our suppliers more. We need to have more options on kind of who we work with, and we need to have a lot better vetting of who we work with. So I would say, it was obviously awful for us at the time, but it definitely taught us a really hard lesson. And having not learned that lesson then, obviously, if that happened today, it'd be a lot worse for us. But thankfully, we learned that early on. And now we have a lot more stringent, auditing processes for everyone we work with, that keeps everyone above board and avoids things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I love hearing that because we all have to have a horror story along the way, especially a manufacturing horror story that's overseas in China, wherever it is, right? And then you come out on the other side and you tell your customers the honest truth, and then you still build trust with them, and now you've still built an awesome brand. I think in direct to consumer, what I've noticed that the most successful brands have done is they build really good trust and they're honest in their approach. When things are wrong, they're letting them know. When things are good, they're also letting them know that. Tell us a little bit about how you build trust with such a mass audience today. If you were to start all over and build a whole new brand today, what would you do to go do that?
Yeah, I think it's just all about transparency. The day that we added kind of a more behind the scenes process of our manufacturing, I think it opened the eyes of a lot of people that didn't kind of know everything that went into making a figure. I think there was kind of a common misconception that we could just 3D print them. So you make a design and then it just comes out in a day and it's good to go. And obviously that's not the case. So I think being transparent in how you make your products is really important. Not only like the actual steps, but where they're made, who's making them, how are you verifying that it's all above board and it's ethical? Like that's one. And then I would say kind of over communicating any like big changes in the business. We're really active on Reddit and Twitter, obviously email as well. But we host like, monthly or bi-monthly AMAs where we'll just answer like any questions people have. Our support team and community team is incredible where, if a customer reaches out, even if they don't have a question about a product, maybe they never even ordered a product and they're just curious about stuff, we answer all those questions, not only through email, but also on socials. So I would say we have a really good two-way relationship where it doesn't feel like we're just talking to people, but we're actually like interfacing with them. And I would say that's really how you build that great customer experience. And then obviously following through on your promises. When you say something is going to deliver on a certain day, delivering it. When you say that something is going to look a certain way, shipping it that way. And we've definitely had hiccups over time, but I think we've been honest about those hiccups and we built that trust with our consumers that they know, when we mess up, we make good on it. We don't leave people hung to dry. And I think that's equally important too.
I love from what I took from that, like the probably key critical thing that I think is the thing that builds the most trust with people is showing people how you actually make your product. We live in this world of drop shipping, and the path resistance to go do that is actually quite easy, right? And find someone on Alibaba to go do that. And I just had the founders of Plunge on here not long ago, the big viral cold plunge company. And they in-house manufacture all their stuff. They take live videos, they share with all their fans. They have people like Andrew Huberman using it, and I love that, right? The whole behind the scenes aspect is so critical because that shows trust, it's connection, it's showing that, hey, we're in the dirt, we're doing this ourselves. We're not calling some overseas supplier to just go make this, put a label on it, and then sell it to you guys and mark it up 45%. There's a lot of work that goes behind this, which means that it's not easy to go do. This is something that has a lot of IP behind it, and that's what makes a really good, sustainable company today. And I want people to understand that there's a shortcut to go building an e-commerce company that you can go do, but then usually that doesn't last, especially in today where there's mass amount of companies that really, can go for a 2-year sprint and then usually die off. But a company like yours that has so many different SKUs, so much IP behind it today, and now you guys are really on the path of doing almost 9 figures in 5 years, like our hat goes off to you. So I really appreciate that you sharing that. How we kind of always like end the podcast and get a little more personal is, I saw you didn't go to college. Is that fair to say? And you went the more untraditional route. You started as an entrepreneur at 17. I don't know how that correlation went with your parents and so forth, but you've obviously done quite successful for yourself. If you're in your early 30s, I assume, going back, do you regret not going to college? If you have a kid today who's also maybe 16, 17 and doubting going to college and wants to go to entrepreneurship, how do you guide them today? Because I think we live in a world where my thesis on this is that going to a state school and getting a 3.2 GPA really has no merit in society today. If you have the opportunity to be 18 years old and go get a real estate license and learn how to sell and knock on doors, has much more upside. And it's a huge conundrum because we live in a world where people want a stamp of approval that I went to Wharton and Harvard and yada, yada, and want to be part of YPO. But you've obviously done quite successful yourself without having the whole accolades of academia behind you. Tell me a little bit about that whole journey, and how you were able to overcome that. And secondly, like what that did for you to where you are today.
For sure. Yeah. So both my parents were in the military when I grew up. My mom had went to college. My dad hadn't, but they were lifelong career service in the military. And after 9/11, they did the post 9/11 GI Bill, which basically let you pass down college benefits to your kids. So they were very adamant that I was going to college. It was essentially going to be paid for, through the post 9/11 GI Bill. So that it wasn't as though I need to go out of pocket. So it was pretty hard for me to say, no, I'm not going to go. But in my junior year, my business started to do a lot better. And moving into senior year, I'd already kind of soft committed to a school. We had visited different schools. But I got a call from my then kind of co-founder of Omnia, Timur, and he called my parents over a Skype call and just said, look, he has a year where he could come out here and work on a business and still go to school after, but learn real world experience. And in a year, this opportunity might not be here. It's not as though you can go to school and come back to it. So I think they were super supportive of me. And I think they looked at it from the lens of like, look, he can always go back to school, but this opportunity is going to pass. And thankfully, I had their support. And, if I'm being completely honest, they were definitely like, look, you're going for a year and then you're going to school. But obviously, anytime you don't go to college right away, it's really hard to go back afterwards. So I moved out to LA. I was an only child, moved from New Hampshire. So obviously, like the total opposite point of the country you could go to, kind of the furthest you go away without going to like Hawaii or a different country, I guess. So I moved out. And then after the first year, was when the business started to do better. And I was like, hey, I think I need an extra year. I don't think I'm going to go quite yet. And obviously a year turned into 2 years, turned to 3 years. And I think when we sold the business, they were like, hey, he's never going back to school. Like he's just going to do this now. I would say for others, I think where college benefits people the most is if they don't have, like structure and I would say like almost like day-to-day motivation in their lives. Like I was someone that was very structured and routine driven. But I think if you aren't, being in an environment where everyone has to go to class and they're separated from their parents, so no one's kind of forcing them, it's kind of on them. I do think that can help people that might struggle with that. I also think as well, if you don't know what you want to do, kind of like with your life after high school, going to college might give you an opportunity where you have a few extra years to kind of figure it out, as long as you're maybe studying stuff that's general enough where you're not kind of pigeonholed in one direction. But I do think, if you're someone that finishes high school and have a pretty good idea of what you want to do in life, going and doing that versus paying, a really expensive tuition and, sitting in classes that might not be super applicative to what real life is, is much better to kind of go the route of just getting your hands dirty and maybe starting a company or working for a startup. There's obviously a ton of paths. And I also think like trade schools are super important too, learning if you want to be a carpenter or an electrician, like there's all those other trades that pay really well and the world needs them, but they aren't necessarily the traditional route. And I think for a while, not necessarily like frowned upon, but it was like, hey, you go to college, you don't go to this. But the city that I grew up in, our high school had a great trade program. I actually went through it to learn marketing and advertising, which I think helped me a lot. And I don't think I'd be here now if I hadn't have done that. So I would welcome, young people, if you don't know what you want to do, maybe try some other stuff before committing to a college, try a trade school. And if you do know what you want to do, getting into startups and entrepreneurship and just getting your hands dirty is important, because I think the world is definitely trending more, in that direction of rewarding people for their work and their input and their expertise versus necessarily, the degree that they have.
Yeah, that's beyond valuable advice. You said a lot of key points there, and I don't know if you know this, but in Europe, actually, they give you a kind of a preamble when you're in high school prior to go to college of doing studying a certain sector that you have a passion of going into college. So if you want to be an accountant, you actually start learning accounting courses in high school and so forth, which I think is quite
Mhm.
valuable rather than being so vague and learning all these different courses that you don't think are going to be correlated to what you're going to go do in the future. Correct. So the fact that
Mhm.
you took trade courses early on and did it in marketing advertising drew you to saying, wow, this is cool. I'm interested in this. I want to go do this. Right. Or the carpenters and the HVAC guys of the world who also do the trades early on and now make a lot more money than a lot of tech guys today in 2024.
Mhm.
So I think like people should understand that, going to college is not mandatory today, in my opinion. I also think that there's a lot of upside to be able to find a certain niche that you become very good at and create mastery at that at a very early age and go double down on that, because there's a lot of upside
Mhm.
in going 2 inches wide and 10 feet deep, as you guys did in your business Youtooz. And you guys obviously created a massive empire out of this, and you guys are probably the leading source in this space. So good on you for that. A couple ways I want to end the series. A couple ways I want to end the podcast. We do a series of rapid fire questions.
Sure.
So no pressure here. So first question: what social media account do you find most entertaining today?
Ooh, that's hard. Just picking one account. I would say if it's creators, video games, queso, VTubers, Chibi Doki. If it's more like general memes, I mostly just scroll Twitter. Like I don't even know at this point what accounts. I just look for funny stuff. And I follow a lot of the UFC as well, so more sports oriented too.
You see that fight yesterday?
Yeah, I watched the Mike Tyson fight. I mean, I think today's fight will be a lot more entertaining. They got John Jones and a lot of great undercard fights too. But I think yesterday was a little more entertainment than sport.
It's crazy the world we live in, right? Money is not an issue. What company are you buying today?
Ooh, probably Kith. I really love how they built a brand, not only that people love, but also when you go into their stores, it's not just their products. They've also become kind of curators of what's cool and unique, which I think is different, from other brands that might only carry their own products in their store. And I just love Kith in general. But yeah, I would probably say Kith.
Tell people a little bit about Kith, because not everyone knows what Kith is.
So Kith is a streetwear brand. I would say they're mostly known for clothing, but they also make a bunch of other products. But in their stores, when you walk in, I would say, depending on the location, maybe half the store is dedicated to their products. The other half is kind of curated handbags. There might be candles. They might have, Adidas shoes or like retro shoes. But I think they've really kind of pioneered a lot of unique collabs. Like before the Mike Tyson fight, they did like a Now Kith shirt, which is like Mike Tyson with like two pigeons, which I think a lot of people love, and it sold out super fast. So I would say it's kind of the evolution, I think, of Supreme that probably means a lot more to people now, because it's less so just one brand and more the curation of brands, the creation of what's cool. And they have two locations here in Miami, so you should check them out pretty often.
What is one tool or resource that you cannot live without?
I'd probably say Superhuman. It's like the email client I use. I used to be really bad with email. I used to be that person where you open their inbox and it's like thousands of unread emails, super unorganized. I started using Superhuman maybe a year or so after they launched. They've been around for many years. And it was actually the guys that originally created Gmail. So they approach in a way where it's like email should be helpful to you. It shouldn't be a stressor. So it's really cleaned up my inbox. They have a much more like zero inbox type philosophy where you should be getting down to nothing each day, unless there's like an action item. So I would say probably Superhuman.
That's one of the better ones I've heard thus far on the spot. Um,
Mhm.
who is the best person in business you've interacted with and why?
I'd probably say the founder of Jazzwares. So his name's Jeremy. Jazzwares is kind of like the newest incumbent to the toy industry that has become a big player. So traditionally, you had kind of Hasbro, Mattel, Spin Master, MGA were kind of the big four. And each year they would all be in the top four, but sometimes they would jockey for that position. Jazzwares started, I want to say 10 or 15 years ago. They acquired a few companies. And anytime I've ran into Jeremy, either at trade events or just catching up on calls and stuff, he's just very passionate about the toy industry, the collectibles industry, and he's a fan of the products. And I think oftentimes, being a smaller player like us that's kind of growing, sometimes the big guys just want to squash you. They want to push you out of the way. Whereas he's always been super helpful and really open about like, hey, anything I can do to help, no strings attached. We're not trying to like buy you guys or invest in you guys. Like we're just here to help and we're just fans of what you're doing. And I would say I've been a huge fan of what he's built with Jazzwares, but also just like him as a person and how he's interacted with us as a company that is technically competing with his, but being very open to always being helpful and inspiring and just sharing ideas.
I like that. It's November 2029. We're 5 years ahead. Where's Austin? Where's Youtooz?
Oh God. I mean, I would hope that we've kind of cracked that top four. Maybe we've jockeyed out there and we're one of those big toy companies. I would say outside that, I hope we're still true to our mission, like making really great products, putting smiles on fans' faces, having great fan service. So I would say hopefully we're still on that track. I love living in Miami, so maybe I move by then, but probably still here in South Florida. And hopefully our team has grown. I mean, right now we're at I think 54 full-time people. By then maybe we're at 100 or something. I love the team we have, and I love continuously fostering and growing that team. So I would say hopefully that's us in 2029.
Awesome, man. Austin, you've put so much insight to everyone on your journey of building a very unique company. You guys are growing so rapidly, so I appreciate your time. Where can people find more about Austin and also about Youtooz?
Yeah, for Youtooz, just at Youtooz everywhere. So Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit. It's kind of our core platforms. Youtooz.com is our site. And then I mostly post on like LinkedIn or Twitter. Twitter would just be at @AustinLong, and then LinkedIn I think is just /AustinLong, but mostly post on those, just kind of keeping people updated. So if anyone wants to check us out, that's the best place.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, guys. This is a pod. Appreciate it.